So my first question is going to be, there has been a rotation of shipping ministers over the last 10 years. What are you going to do, or what do you hope to achieve in your tenure, however brief it may be,
Well,
or lengthy?
Well, it's absolutely great to be speaking to you today, and obviously it's a great honour to be the Maritime Minister. I've been in post now for coming up for a year, and of course I sit on the shoulders of giants who have gone before me, and actually an awful lot of work has been done with the sector since Maritime 2050, which was published in 2019. So what I have done is come in and looked at all the work that has gone on before and thought to myself, right, well now what do we really need to focus on? So for me that's three areas. It's economic impact. How do we make the sector more profitable, with better productivity, absolutely key, and how can government help? The second is people and safety, and the third is carbon emissions and of course the wider environment. So within those three areas we're looking to work very closely with the sector to see how we can take things forward.
So what do you hope to achieve in your tenure? What do you want your big achievement to be when you look at those three key things?
Well, I mean, this is a private sector, and so my view is actually all we do is we set the certainty around regulation, around policy for the sector itself. So I'm not looking to have like one great big marvellous thing, because it's actually not about me, it is about the sector. So the way I will be taking forward these things is working with a Maritime Council, which I set up in June of this year, to focus on the key deliverables. So for example, in the area of economic impact, what I really want to understand from ports, and UK ports in particular, is what can the government do to help them expand, work with new industries like the offshore wind industry, all of those sorts of things. You know, how are they dealing with the planning system? Does the planning system understand ports? All of those sorts of things are the behind the scenes things that I can do, but actually I want the achievements really to be from the sector itself.
So one of the biggest challenges facing shipping now is decarbonisation.
Yeah.
So how is the UK government strategy aimed at reducing the carbon footprint of shipping, both domestically and internationally?
Well, I'm sure you will have seen that the agreement that was reached at the IMO was, I think, groundbreaking. It really has given us the momentum internationally to work forward with that. The UK was instrumental in that. We were one of the leaders working with all sorts of like-minded countries, but also bringing on board some of those who were more reluctant, or those places that are going to be very impacted by climate change. So I'm really pleased that the IMO has now reached that agreement. So the UK is now focusing on the comprehensive impact assessment to figure out what sort of measures can we introduce and the impact on the sector, and of course that will be our focus. Domestically, what I want my government to do, and what we are doing, is we're looking at the Clean Maritime Plan. It was last published in 2019. Now, you know and I know that in the last few years a huge amount of stuff has happened around decarbonisation. So it's time to check everything again. Are we doing the right things? Do we have the right domestic policies in place for decarbonisation? And is the government providing the right support?
So the EU has come up with a very robust series of regulations to decarbonise shipping. What is your government's view about whether or not that can be perhaps used as a template for reducing shipping emissions here?
I mean, obviously we are looking at what other countries are doing and the impact on our country, but also emissions internationally. Our priority is very much to work internationally, because I think very hyper-regional schemes are great, but they may cause very significant distortions in the market, and therefore you always running to catch up if you've distorted what is otherwise a competitive market. So obviously I will be looking at all of the available options, but when the Clean Maritime Plan refresh comes out towards the end of this year, then in that we will set out everything that we're planning to do, mostly domestically, but also internationally as well.
So when I talk to some of the local ship owners, they talk about the lack of provision of green electricity at ports for the ferry industry. For example, if a ferry is going to be electric and it's leaving from the Port of Dover, there's no provision to be able to properly have green electricity or have a green corridor there. So what work is the government taking to sort of meet those challenges? It's a challenge that's not unique to the UK. It's making sure that shoreside you're also providing the infrastructure to allow for decarbonisation.
Absolutely, and I'll take you back to the work that I'm doing with ports and thinking about the economic impact. What we need to understand from ports, from a government perspective, is what do they think their demand is? It's all very well a port sticking its hand up saying, well, I want some electricity. Well, that's great, but is your need greater than some other port, which might have a larger number of cruise vessels berthing, for example, all sorts of things like that. So we need to think of the picture as a whole. So we will be putting together and are putting together, working with the BPA and other trade organisations to try and understand what does the big picture look like for decarbonisation on the shore side, and then how can we feed that into the work that the Department for Economic Security and Net Zero is doing around the grid as a whole. Because again, there's lots of different sectors who will be saying, actually, we need it. And I can turn around and say, well, actually, I've got data here from the ports, from the operators, which say this is exactly what they need and when. We will be in a much better place to be able to demonstrate the benefit of investment in the grid and emissions reductions if we have that information. So that's what we're working on at the moment.
So does that sort of assessment have a timeline to it yet?
It's an ongoing piece of work, and I should imagine it'll be an ongoing piece of work for quite some time, because obviously grid upgrades are going to take place, for 5, 10, 15 years, and so really there's not a timeline per se, because it is an ongoing discussion between us and other parts of government and sharing that information.
Okay, and just segueing now to London and its financial services sector, which is, at one stage London was a world leader in shipping, surpassed now by Singapore and the tilt towards Asia. What can the UK and London specifically do in order to retain the experience and its position as a leading provider of maritime services?
Well, I think there's many sort of elements to that, and I think also what I would like to include in the maritime services type area as well is digitisation and AI and technology, because I think that is also a very important area that the maritime sector needs to put its arms around and embrace. It needs to think of in the same sort of context as our leadership in maritime law, or indeed other things that we do around insurance, and think about how we're going to make sure that we can take that forward. Now, at the key and the heart of all of that is people. So I hear from the sector that a lot of people who go on into the professional services actually started life at sea, and they have a very interesting background as to how does it work out there. So I am looking very closely at the subsidy that the government currently provides for officer cadet training, to make sure not only is that subsidy going to the right people, we're getting as many people through as we can, but allied to that, we're looking at the syllabus. So to making sure that the things that officer cadets, for example, learn over their 3 years is also, relevant to the wider maritime sector. Because it's not, you don't just need to know how to operate a ship, but actually you've got to think about the context in which you're playing. So I think that's really important in providing that throughput of very qualified people. I think the second thing is things like being open for business. London International Shipping Week has really taken my breath away as to how many people turn up, how many conversations happen, and how many conversations happen that I'm not a part of, and I'd really like to be, but I just don't have enough hours in the day. So I think being open for business, having things like London International Shipping Week, having the sorts of challenging questions that you're asking, but also other people who are sort of slightly on the side, not allied to one particular group within the sector, but saying, hey, you guys, you need to go and talk to these people, or you need to think about X, Y, Z. So I think there's a lot of people out there who are really helping the sector, and we've all just got to work together to make sure that it succeeds.
Minister, thank you very much, and pace yourself for the rest of London International Shipping Week. That's all I can advise.
I'm going to try very hard to do so.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.